That's right, recording in progress. Today, the title that we have given to our classes for Chayei Sarah on the 12th of November is The City of Four in Egyptian Inscriptions. Here it says hieroglyphic inscription. We'll see it's more about some sort of tablets of the Amarna letters, which we'll talk about, and then improper requests and relying on omens. And I'm going to try and sit still a little bit, not move too much. For those that are following, I got the feedback that I move around too much. So that's what happens if you have ADHD and the medication wears off.
Just giving.
It's always good to have a laugh, right? Exactly. So let us begin.
5 minutes.
Today, those are today's two subject matters. Let us begin straight into our sources. But just before we actually do get into our sources, before we get into our two sources for today, if you were listening to the first class that I gave, I was quite clear that I would be bringing Jewish sources and Jewish sources only, which actually is a conflict or a contradicting to the very title of this week's class, because I'm suggesting some sort of Egyptian inscriptions as a source which is not from the Torah. So, as I've said before, sometimes the title of these classes is more about getting you in, and when you give it some sort of strange title, people are like, oh, I want to hear about that. What does that mean? But we will also read a little bit about that. And the reason why I brought these sources is because we all know the historic connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. And Hebron is one of the oldest cities that were established in Canaan, even before it was given, before Abraham had settled in the land, or the Jewish people had settled in the land. And we're going to, so we reflect on that as well, and in the history of it. And then we'll look at its name that it's referred to in the Torah, because it has numerous names. It could be a bit confusing. What is the actual name of this place? And then how it got its name. Some of it is to do with giants that may have lived there. Others to do with burial grounds, people that are buried there. And again, these are all entirely from the Torah sources. So let's have a look at the first two sources. The first source is from Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. So it's not a purely religious, authentic Orthodox source. And I will say, by way of, if I may just add a point on this, in terms of when it comes to sources from the Torah. As far as Judaism is concerned, if you bring a challenge to anything that is written in the Torah from something else in the world, they'll say, very nice what you've brought us. This is what the Torah says. Now, that might sound a bit like crazy. What I mean to say is they wouldn't dismiss what is there, and they'd be interested to know about it, but they wouldn't be able to decide a law or an action based upon it. For example, one of the famous things are it's Titus's Ark, where the Jewish people are engraved on or taken in carrying what looks like a candelabra. And there's a debate amongst the sages as to whether the candelabra in the temple was round or was diagonal. And whenever anybody says, well, look what it has on Titus, they'd say, well, that's not a proof what's engraved on Titus. That's not a Jewish source of how religious practice should be met. It may have historical reference. It could have been a copy. It could have been a nice menorah that somebody had in their home that was taken to be sold in the ancient Roman Empire. So we can't define a Jewish principle or law from such sources. But it's not to say you dismiss those sources. Historically, they can enlighten and tell us elements of it. And as I've said, the purpose of this class is generally using only Torah sources, because what I'd like to do is look at the world things that we speak about, whether it's dinosaurs or large creatures or the age of the universe, and try and find a Torah relevance to it versus trying to say, how does the outside world influence Torah? It's more about how the Torah is doing it the other way around. So that was a necessary introduction for that.
Can't you get the truth from the BBC?
Brilliant question. This week of all weeks, can you get the truth from the BBC?
I think that you won't find Torah on the BBC. You'll be closer to finding the Quran from the BBC.
All right, let's go to our first source. The Amarna letters are a trove of documents found at ancient Amarna in Egypt, dating to the 14th century BCE. The letters, or rather clay tablets, are the desperate correspondence from leaders of Canaan to Egypt's pharaoh asking urgently for help against the invading Habiru. What does that sound like, Habiru? Hebrew. Nomads that were taking over the land. The linguistic similarities between Hebrew and Hebrew are very crazily similar. And the dating of the letters fit the general time frame of the Israelites in the Promised Land. And what does it end there in the last line? There is some debate about whether any of these letters came from Hebron. So we have an ancient tablet, which is a letter, which is not letters we have today, which is engraved with the ancient letters of those periods, and in it, it seems to be potentially the reference to Hebrews and also a reference to Hebron, this city. There is a wonderful article which I do recommend reading from a guy called Label Resnick on Aish, and I can share the link if anybody would like to see it. And he goes into slightly more details, first of all, of the history of how these archaeological finds were done. It was quite kind of peculiar how somebody was digging and they found all these ancient archaeological finds of tablets in some compost area in Egypt. And when they were sort of found, at first people thought it was a fake or a nonsense. And I think some of them were even discarded. Can you imagine? Thousands of years old, but finally some of them were traced. And if we look toward let's look at the very bottom, there are 10 surviving correspondence. There's an image of it there as well, between King Shawardata and Akhenaten. Shawardata was the king of Hebron district, and he himself states in letter, this is how it's been indexed, after the required greetings, my cities are rebelling against me. Archers are needed, like in the city of Hebron. So this is the reference of Hebron that was referred to in the previous source of the Armstrong Institute, and here he's taking it even further to actually quote it. They tremble before the Pharaoh, I prostrate myself before the Pharaoh. He seemed to be asking for Pharaoh to send him some more military aid to be able to deal with some of his own internal battles. Here it's not necessarily referring to the Jews, but it refers to the city of Hebron. So Hebron is a well-established city that is being written about in ancient writings outside of the Torah. Now that's how I got you through the door. Now let's see what the Torah has to say about Hebron, aka Kiryat Arba, aka Plains of Mamre, aka we'll see the different names that it's referred to here. Anybody want to add anything on that? Although it's not much to add outside of just these references. Perhaps we should get into it and then we can we'll go for further conversation. Yeah.
Just in terms of putting the timeline into context.
Yes.
Where is it? I mean, obviously I know when 14th century BCE was, but what are we Abraham? We're post Abraham, pre-Abraham.
It's Abrahamic time. This would be post Abrahamic times.
Post. Okay.
Yeah. Let's now have a look at the pure Torah sources.
Have it done a radiocarbon dating of the tombs in Hebron?
I don't know. I was reading a little bit about the large amounts of archaeology work that has been done in Hebron, but I don't know if they've done that. I don't know if they actually can, because that would be quite, taking up the graves of some holy sites, which I think would cause quite a lot of unrest. Yeah, I think there's a difference between the mummies that are in Egypt, where they sort of are lying there, perhaps, versus digging up a grave. I think it might be a bit more
grave.
getting in trouble.
My posture.
That was last week. Was the etiquette. Okay. Let us go to pure Torah sources. This week's Torah portion, Sarah is laid to rest, a place with 3 names, or we'll even see more than that. And Sarah, it's 3 names in the very first reading. And Sarah was 120 years old, source 3, the bottom of page 1. These were the years of Sarah's life. And Sarah died in, what's it called? Kiryat Arba. This is Hebron. So we've got 2 names, Kiryat Arba, Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn Sarah and to weep for her. And Abraham stood up before his dead and spoke to the sons of Chet, saying, I'm a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me possession, top of page 2, of a burying place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. And then 10 or 12 verses later, and then Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, now Hebron. So it's also called Mamre. In Machpelah, which is facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan.
Is it Mamre and now? No, is it a verb?
to plain, to place.
It's a place, and it was named after the guy who
Oh,
owned it.
very good. We're going to speak about that. Some people say it was.
Sorry, I didn't.
After who?
We'll see. We'll see. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay.
Either it's named after the guy who was there, or one of the warriors that were there. We're going to see.
God named
Okay.
it after
It'll be the
his
king.
gratitude because he
No,
inspired.
that's what we did last week. The gratitude wasn't. God didn't name the place with gratitude. God came to visit Abraham there out of gratitude. That was last
Oh,
week.
fine. Okay.
So all we've read so far is Sarah passes away, she's buried, and this place is referred to in three names: Kiryat Arba, Hebron, and the plains of Mamre. Three different names. Now, when we go to Joshua, and it speaks about when the Jewish people enter the land and settle in the land, it gives us slightly more detail in the chronological naming of Hebron. It says as follows: the name of Hebron was formerly Kiryat Arba. So in our verse, it said Hebron hi Kiryat Arba, Kiryat Arba hi Hebron, Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron. In Joshua, it confirms for us that first it was called Kiryat Arba, then it was referred to Hebron. But then it goes further and it says Arba was the great man among the Anakites. So what is Kiryat Arba? Who are the Anakites? And what is the history behind this name, Kiryat Arba? Before we do that, we're going to add another name from source 5. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba. It was called 4 names: Eshkol, Mamre, Kiryat Arba,
Also
and
a person
Hebron.
lived there.
Eshkol, very good. It has 4 names again of this
It's also
geographical
not the Hebrew
place.
word for grapefruit.
It is. But remember, we're focusing, and we're going to try and stay on tone of
Okay.
what we've advertised to be talking about. But thank you for your continued insight, which we love every single week. Let's go on to the next midrash. 10 reasons to why it is called Kiryat Arba. The first 7 are from the midrash directly. It is because of 6. It is because of 4 righteous men resided there: Aner, Eshkol, Mamre, and Abraham. So what have we already seen here? 2 of the names that we just read of 2 of the people that lived there. Usually we in sort of in the Polish, Russian, you were called from the place you came from. Chlemowitzes came from Chlemovitz, and the Chelmanoviches came from Chelm. Here it was the other way around. They called it Mamre because Mamre lived there. Or it's called Eshkol because Eshkol lived there. Now, these 3 people we'll talk about soon.
Chance for a grapefruit.
But these 4 righteous men were circumcised there: Abraham, Anar, Eshkol, and Mamre. Which is an interesting fact, because when we read and spoke about Abraham's test of circumcising himself, he says he consulted with Mamre, he was his friend. But it doesn't say that Mamre also went and circumcised himself. So this is a midrash that suggests they joined in. That's the first reason it was called Arba, for the 4 giants that lived there. So Arba is 4, and it's those 4 people. Alternatively, it is because 4 righteous men, patriarchs of the world, were buried there. So we've obviously read at the beginning of this week's Torah portion of Sarah being buried there. But in addition to Sarah being buried there, 4 righteous men were buried there. Who are those 4 righteous men? Adam, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the first one is 4 great men that lived there. Second one is 4 great men that are buried there.
We have 4.5 great men that were buried there because
That's next week.
Can I
Yeah,
a question on that?
yeah, of course.
It's
It's not heart, it's his head.
It's saying Sarah's being died and it's called Kiryat Arba, and we've said if it's because the 4, but at that point Abraham is
Excellent.
alive,
Yeah.
Isaac
Brilliant.
is alive,
Have
and
not yet.
Jacob, I'm guessing, hasn't been born at this point.
Correct. Brilliant. So how are we calling it Kiryat Arba if they are not buried there yet? So was it a prophetic name that yet they would be eventually be buried there?
Ruach HaKodesh.
See.
C. Let's read number C. Alternatively, it is because 4 matriarchs are buried there. 2 of them already, even Sarah, and Rebecca and Leah would eventually be buried there. And we've just mentioned another person whose head is buried there, but we'll save that for next week. Not half his body, just his head. Alternatively, sorry, that's number 3. But as Amanda has asked correctly, how is it called Kiryat Arba if they've not yet been buried there? Remember, this is midrash, so not everything has to make sense. We're just giving you, we're not giving you a historical story. We're giving you now how we can read it today.
We're filling in the gaps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Number D, and it is also called after its lords who numbered 4, the giants and his 3 sons, Achiman, Sheshai, Talmai, and their father. So we've had 4 great men living there who had circumcisions there, 4 great men or 4 great women buried there, and 4 giants that lived there. Achiman, Sheshai, Talmai, who were referred to in the Torah when the spies come to scout the land, and their father. So 4 famous giants. Rabbi Azariah said it's named so because when Abraham departed to fight the 4 kingdoms, which we read about last week, the world leaders, he pursued them and left from there. So Kiryat Arba is the battle of the 4 was launched from this place. So again, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reasons already. 6, it is so named because it fell by lottery to 4 parties. Israel was divided amongst the different tribes. This part was divided into 4, initially to Judah, then to Caleb, then to the Levites, and then to the Kohanim.
This is long in the future.
G. Also, it is one of the 4 undesirable places in the land of Israel that were very rocky. What are they? There's an argument among the sages, the Dor district, Timnach Serach, and Hebron. Some say it was Darna, Kiryat Sana, Timnach Serach, and Hebron. So we have so far, just from the Medrash, numerous reasons why this place is called Kiryat Arba. Why are they getting so verkocht in it? Why are they trying to, verkocht is a Yiddish word. I don't know, but that's not what we're here to answer. We're here to give you these fascinating, interesting sources. Now, Rashi does sort of a synthesis between B and C. Rather than, and why is it called Kiryat Arba? Not because 4 great men are buried there or 4 great women are buried there. Rather, 4 couples, 4 great couples are buried there. So 8 people in all, but they are a husband and wife. So Rashi's synthesis put together 2, B and C, and he said 4 couples are buried there: Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, and of course Rachel, Jacob's other wife, is buried in her famous plot outside of Israel, on the gates of the entrance to Shechem. Another reason is given by Rabbeinu Bachya in his commentary. He quotes all the previous ones that we have just read, and he adds, he's a Spanish 13th century sage, and he writes, because it belonged to the portion of the tribe of Judah, who was the 4th son. Now again, we can ask your question on all of this, Amanda. None of this was done at that particular time. This was all much later. So they were calling it Kiryat Arba long before Judah, who was the 4th son of Jacob, was living there. But again, that's a technical question. We're giving you the background as the Torah has described it. Let's now look at the giants. So one of the answers that we read before was the famous giants, 3 giants that were living there and their father. Source J suggests not that Arba is 4 at all. Rather, it was the name of the father of the 3 giants. His name was Arba. Rashi on Joshua, the great source J at the bottom of page 2, the greatest man among the giants, the father of Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, was Arba. So this historically actually fits in the best, because the giants had been living there for a long time, and their father was Arba. And he had 3 boys called Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. Another suggestion is that this giant and his children, which I can't tell you much details about them outside of the fact when the spies come, we can read the giants in source 7, that they went up at top of page 3. They went up in the south. This is when Moses sends the spies to scout the land, and they come back with a bad report. And one of the reports, they say they'd met the giants while they were there. They went up in the south, and he came to Hebron, and there were Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of the giant. Now, Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan of Egypt. In other words, again, referring to the age of this old city of Hebron, Rashi explained exactly what 7 years represent. But these giants had been there for some time. Another verse that talks about these giants is in Deuteronomy, in Devarim. Moses repeats lots of what had happened to the Jewish people along their 40 years. And he repeats it sometimes in different ways than the original verses as they were told in its place. And this particular verse, he says, what kind of place are we going to? The spies came and told the rest of the Jewish people. Our brothers have taken the heart out of us, saying, we saw there a people stronger and taller than we, large cities with walls, skies, and even Anakites. And the story of the spies in Devarim, the Torah has what's known as Targum, translations. Now, we have today many translations of the Torah, English, French, Spanish, Russian. But the original Torah was never to be translated. The sages didn't want it translated. But because there was a period where the Jewish people were mostly conversing in the language of their particular time, there's different rabbis that did what's called the Targum, a translation of it. There's Targum Unclus, Targum Yonasan Ben Uziel. There's different times. When you open a Chumash, some of the ones with more commentators, you'll see that there's different Targumin translations, but they've thrown in a little bit of interpretation with it. So it's not an immediate translation, but it also adds things. So on that particular verse, what's that?
That is inevitable.
That is inevitable, but it was also holy people that were doing it who had authority to do that. And on this particular translation, it says, I've translated it from Aramaic into English, but to bring one thing out, this last line. And also the sons of Ephron, the giant, the mighty ones we saw there. Who is Ephron? He is called Ephron the giant. Ephron is the guy that Abraham purchases the land from. So he's suggesting that this whole family of giants, well, he's not suggesting it, but Reb Moshe Ziddel speculates that he's a more modern rabbi. He speculates that Targum Yonatan is suggesting that the giants that were living there were the very people that Abraham was talking to. So it's called Kiryat Arba because the father of the giants is there. His name is Arba, but he's also known as Ephron. And he is the man in the beginning of this week's Torah portion that Abraham is negotiating with to buy a plot to bury him. So we've gone from all different names to a giant that lived there to who this giant is. And then in conclusion, that one of the names we said earlier was Anor, Eshkol, and Mamre. Who are these guys? These guys are friends of Abraham. They help him, he advises them, and he has a connection with them. And Mamre then is, rather than it being one of the names of the place, it seems from source 10 that actually it's sort of the area, sort of Leeds is in Yorkshire. So it's a bigger area is called Mamre. The plains were the plains of Mamre. And in Mamre, there was a city called Hebron, also known as Kiryat Arba originally. So these are different, differing approaches to this name of this ancient city that we when we think of the land of Israel, that the Jewish people have inherited. The very first part of the land that the Jewish people inherited was actually purchased by Abraham from Ephron, the Hittite, to bury his wife in Hebron. And it's actually one of the holiest places that we have, second to the temple. Second holiest place is Mount Machpelah. And there's no grapefruit reference here. Why Israel? Why today the modern Hebrew is Eshkol for a grapefruit? I don't know. Perhaps it's because they would grow there. I don't. But still, it doesn't answer that.
Is this the first transaction ever recorded?
Is it the first transaction ever recorded for land
In the Torah.
in the Torah? No, the sale of Joseph was a transaction.
So what?
But land.
Could be something from the Dead Sea
Oh
Scrolls.
no, sorry, that's much later. The chart, the
Maybe.
Yes,
transaction of
yes,
Joseph.
yes, yes.
Could be something about an ocean.
By the way, the transaction, just to throw in another class, the transaction there's a story we're going to tell on the 10th of December that Joseph's sale funded new shoes. The brothers bought new shoes with the money of that sale, just because you brought that up. I think it might be the first one that we have, certainly that's recorded. I think it might very well be. So there we have, in short, the first section of, not in short, in quite some time, the first part of our class. Anybody have any questions or comments on Kiryat Arba, and it's bringing down in the Armstrong Institute and Amarna. Yeah.
The word Kiryat, what does that mean? We've focused on the second part.
Yes.
Does it just mean place or?
Today, a Kiryat is a it's today in modern Hebrew. It's used as a center, sort of like the Kiryat is the center of the city. But I think it also means what it means in ancient. Kiryat is a sort of a part of a town, I think.
Right, okay.
Kiryat.
High
It's
Street.
sort of defining it as a place, the place of X.
What did it say in our translation? For Kiryat, it didn't translate it.
Didn't. It said we focused on the arbor part.
Yeah.
What's the root of the word?
Can you bring one of the
It's
purple
not really
Colossians and put the cap on one?
What's the root of the
Kiryat is a kuf resh yud aleph. And Kiryat. It's the word is to call, but I don't know. I don't know the answer. I have to check, and I should have checked.
To call, so
It's a great question. Thank you, Amanda.
depending on how you spell it, to rip.
No, did it say? What did it say on the very beginning there? The question that we had here from Amanda was, what does Kiryat mean? Kiryat. We just told you Arabic.
It just says Kiryat.
Yeah, everyone just puts Kiryat.
Should I get blue?
This was the original name of Hebron. Kiryat. City. Kiryat means the city. City of the four.
Hebron.
Okay, let's go on to our next one, signs and omens. This is a complete different subject, and it would have been better if the recording had ended here, just before here, because then we would have been smoother transition into the next part. But signs and omens, this is a really interesting topic, and we're only going to touch upon it as it appears in this week's Torah portion, and this is a very broad subject matter, as many of the things that we touch on during these conversations on the Torah, and that is signs and omens, that we say, well, such and such happened, therefore such and such happened. It's quite a superstitious thing to do, but it is brought in the Torah, and it's discussed by the sages, and we'll discuss it as within a context of a story in this week's Torah portion. But by way of introduction, the Torah says in Deuteronomy, we're now on page 4 at the top. It says, "You shall not be found among you anyone who passes his or son or daughter through fire." These were ancient idol worship, pagan behaviors, soothsayer, and a menachesh. What is a menachesh? A diviner of auspicious times is translated in this particular translation, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer. The sages taught from the Talmud, we're now reading the Talmud on this verse, the enchanter mentioned in the verse is one who relies on superstitious signs. E.g., by the way, just a note on the source here, this is the Talmud from the Koren. The bold is the original Talmud, and the non-bold is sort of the missing words to help you understand and make sense of the sentence, because it was written sometimes quite cryptic and you couldn't always understand it. So we've got it with some extra here. The sages taught the enchanter mentioned in the verse is one who relies on superstitious signs, e.g., one who says, if one's bread fell from his mouth, that is a bad sign for him. By the way, I recently learned that the Russians don't like if you step on their foot. If you step on their foot, no one likes to be stepped on the foot, but even if you do it gently, the way to remove the omen is to stand on the guy's foot that stood on your foot. They look at it as a bad sign. Just a random thing I learned recently. That is a bad sign. Or if one's staff fell from his hand, it is a bad sign. Or if one's son calls from behind, it's a sign that he should return from his journey. Or if a raven calls to him, or if a deer blocks him on the way, or if a snake is to his right, or a fox is to his left. That happened to me when I went through Regent's Park this morning on my run. All of these are bad signs. The fox. An enchanter is one who relies on these as bad sign and consequently changes course of action. The term is also referring to one who says to a collector of charity, do not collect from me first, that is a bad sign for me. Or do not collect from me now because it is morning and it's a bad sign to begin the day with loss. Or do not collect from me now because the new moon is a bad sign to begin the month with loss. So these are individuals who have taken a happening around them and translated it into some sort of a sign and a message that they should or shouldn't do something. Now, this isn't quite what this Torah portion and the story that we're about to read is about, but it is bringing us the verse and then the Talmud codifying and explaining that verse to somebody who is using a sign to drive their decision making and make them approach a particular situation differently or in a particular way. Which leads us to unreasonable requests as brought in the Talmud. And we've still not yet got
Can
to
I
the
ask
story.
a
Yes, of
question
course you
about
can.
that?
Please.
Is that because the universe is not made that way, or because we're not supposed to interpret it that way?
Great question. Really, really good question.
Thank you for saying that. You're like a GT.
ChatGPT.
Please give me a nice prompt.
It's a great question. It's a
Really
great question.
handsome. Keep asking.
No, we'll talk about it. Well, to keep ChatGPT in business.
Right.
He's the best compliment. But sometimes I yell at ChatGPT that he's nonsense. He said, "Please be soft on me, Yagrele." It's a good question. Is it because Hashem wanted things to operate in a particular way, and how we daven to Hashem and how we ask for them? And we'll talk about it at the end a little bit about the purity of the message of our relationship with Hashem and what we ask for and how we do that. We'll definitely look at that soon. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said, source 1, that's why it should be source 2, on page 4. 3 people entreated God in an unreasonable manner. Two of them, God responded reasonably, namely with a favorable response. And to one, he responded unreasonably, i.e. unfavorably. And they are Eliezer, number 1, Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, Saul, the son of Kish, and Yiftach, the Gileadite. The Gemara clarifies each of these cases in turn. Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, he made a request when he prayed by the well, as it is written, that the maiden to whom I shall say, please let down your pitcher that I may drink, and she shall say, drink, and I'll give your camels to drink. Then she be the one whom you appointed for your servant Isaac. He's looking for a shidduch, for a match. He's been sent on a mission, and he gives a sign, and that's how he knows this girl will be the one to marry.
But there's a rationale there.
Of course there is, and we're going to get to it. Eliezer entreated God unreasonably. Why? Because it could have been a lame or even a blind, and yet a person who wasn't suitable for him. Yet God responded reasonably, and who came? The amazing, beautiful matriarch Rebecca. With regard to Saul, the son of Kish, he made an offer when Goliath, the Philistine, challenged the Jews, and he said, and it shall be the man who kills him. The king will enrich him with great riches and will give him a daughter, his daughter. Who killed him? Well, the Talmud said it could have been a slave. It could have been a mamzer that wouldn't be able to marry his daughter. Nevertheless, God responded immediately, and King David was the one that did it. However, Yiftach HaGiladi, upon leaving for battle, issued a statement that it should be that whatever he says to Hashem, that if I come back and successfully from the battle, then whoever comes from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace, it shall be to the Lord, and I'll bring it up of a burnt offering. So it could be his cat, it could be his dog, could be his monkey, could be his pet gorilla, goldfish, could be anything. But what came, as it says, there might even have been an impure or non-kosher animal, but what did come? His daughter came to meet him. Let's look a little bit at these stories.
That sounds like that.
Yeah, let's read these stories. What time is it? I don't have my watch yet. 20. Okay, we have a bit of time, so let's read the stories a little bit more in detail. So Eliezer, as we read it in this week's Torah report. The servant then took 10 of his master's camels and set out, top of page 5, source A. A document listing all the master's wealth in his hand, and he rose and made his way to Aram Naharaim, to Haran, to the city of Nachar. Where Abraham's brother had settled, because his mission from his master Abraham was to choose somebody from his family.
Was Nahor not dead from jumping into a furnace?
No, that was
the
Haran.
other guy?
That was Haran. Eliezer made the camels kneel outside the city near a well of water in the afternoon when the women go out to draw water. He said, God of my master Abraham, arrange events for me this day. So he's talking to Hashem, but he's using a sign that you grant me favor to my master. Here I stand by the spring of water, and the daughters of townswomen are coming out to draw water. Let it be that the maiden who I say, please tilt your pitcher so I may drink, and replies, drink, and the camel should drink, she is designated for your servant Isaac, and I will know that through her that you have acted kindly with my master. He had not yet finished speaking when Rebekah came out. She had been born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. Her picture was on her shoulder. The maiden was very beautiful. The servant ran towards her and said, if you'd like to sip from the little water from your pitcher, drink, sir. She quickly lowered a pitcher from her shoulder. When she finished giving him to drink, she brought for the camels and so on. The man wondered about her, verse 22, when the camels had drunk. And then finally, he gave her some nose rings and bracelets weighing 10 gold shekels. He said, 23, whose daughter are you? She doesn't even know whose daughter it is yet. He's given her he's given a sign. The sign has been answered. Rebecca's come. He then gives her the jewelry and then says, whose daughter are you? It's really important for us to know that this is the order. Asked for the sign. Sign has been met. Gave the jewelry, thinking that she's the one. Then asked, whose daughter are you? And she says, I'm the daughter of Bethuel the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And he knows that's great niece of my master Abraham. She then said, we have plenty straw and fodder, etc. Fast forward 25 verses. The reason we fast forward 25 verses because the Torah repeats the entirety of the story as Eliezer says it to his master. And the man Laban and Bethuel answered, saying, this has clearly come from the Lord, from Hashem. We therefore cannot say anything to refuse you, neither bad or in disrespectful manner. Rebecca, here in front of you, take her and let her be a wife for your master's son. When Abraham's servant heard these words, he prostrated himself to the ground in thanking Hashem. So this is the story that the Talmud says. 3 people asked incorrectly, 2 were answered correctly, and this is the first. Let's look at the other 2. These are synopsis of Jewish history as written by Nissan Mindel in a book called Talks and Tales. And it's literally directly from the Tanakh, but it gives it a nice abridged version. So we're able to focus on the bits that we want to focus. Yiftach, who had been expelled from home by his half-brothers, had gone to live in the land of Tov. He was a man of valor and soon became the leader of a band of brave and fearless men. The elders of Gilead sent for him and asked him to become their leader. The Jews were suffering at the hands of the Ammonites. He was ready for war. It tells more of the story than he was ready for. He used a successful outflanking maneuver, moving his men through narrow passes in the hills until he reached the lands of the Ammonites, meeting with little opposition there, since the main army of the Ammonites was in Gilead. Yiftach quickly captured all the strong and fortified cities of Ammon. The Ammonites were forced to withdraw their own land, but the fate of the battle had been sealed. Yiftach's victory was completed and overwhelming. This was not an unpleasant thing then happens with the tribe of Ephraim. And then it continues, this was not the last unpleasant thing that Yiftach suffered even in his glory. For before Yiftach set out on his fight to the Ammonite, he had made a vow to sacrifice to God whatever would come out first from his house to greet him, if and when he came home victorious. So again, if I come home, then I will offer this as a sacrifice. Imagine his shock when upon his return from the war, his one and only child, his beloved daughter, came out to greet her victorious father. Yiftach told his daughter of his dreadful vow. But father, doesn't the Torah forbid human sacrifice? Alas, I made a vow. I must keep it somehow. Didn't Jacob make a vow to give 10th part of everything to God, and yet did he offer one of his 12 sons as a sacrifice in fulfillment of his vow? Just how that's her argument? Who knows? Yiftach, however, was sure he could find no release from his vow, and that his daughter would at least have to become a recluse for the rest of her life and devote it entirely to God. To be living on her own, not interacting with not socializing. This was the only way in which his vow could be fully fulfilled, since it was against the law for Torah to offer any human being as a sacrifice. Then Yiftach's daughter asked for a period of 2 months to bewail her youth, and she retired to live in seclusion, the life of a hermit. Thus Yiftach's daughter gave up a happy and youthful life, so as not to disgrace her father, and he was answered badly. What a terrible, tragic story. And then we've got King David, then we've got Shaul. I don't know why I wrote King David here. It was actually the story of King David, but within the eyes of King Shaul's experience. Michal was the second eldest daughter of King Saul. When the king was confronted by Goliath, he promised that the warrior to defeat the giant would be wed to one of his daughters. David came and slew the giant. King Saul proposed that David marry his eldest daughter, Merav. However, at that time, Merav had been given in marriage to another. King Saul then discovered that his daughter Michal wished to marry David. The king requested from David as a wedding dowry to marry Michal 100 foreskins from his enemies, the Philistines. King Saul had hoped
100 foreskins.
Saul had hoped that David would fall in battle as he grew fearful of David. But David succeeded and took Michal as his wife. And just to note, in the story of David and Goliath's battle, It's a phenomenal story worth reading, but David hears the Saul's officers saying how whoever kills Goliath will get wealth and his daughter. And King David dismisses it and say, that's not the reason why we're going to go to battle. King Saul offers him his armor. It's a phenomenal story. But at the end of it, King Saul is the one who says, whoever wins this battle and gets rid of this guy will marry my daughter. But he was answered okay, because even though King David was a bit of an adversary to him, King David marries his daughter.
So you're saying King David obtained 100 foreskins from the Philistines
in order to get that. So there we have the stories with a little bit more detail. Remember, we like to tell stories in these classes too. So that's what we have just done. But we have another story because Rav didn't want to eat meat. What's this story? Talmud Chulin 95b, text 2 on page 6. Rav was going to the home of Rav Hanan, his son-in-law. He saw that the ferry was coming toward him just when he had arrived at the river bank. Now, he was planning to go to his son-in-law anyway, but it was arriving. He said, the ferry is coming toward me, even though I did not arrange for it to come now, unlike the Jubilee line where you're waiting. That is a sign that a good day, i.e. a festive meal, awaits me in the place where I'm going. After crossing the river on the ferry, Rav went and stood at the gate of Rav Hanan's home. He looked through a crack in the door and saw an animal that was hanging and ready to be cooked. He knocked on the gate and everyone went out to greet him, and the butchers also came out to greet him. Rav did not remove his eyes from the meat that the butchers were preparing. You'll see why soon. He said to them, if you had eaten the meat based on the later on, he said, if you had eaten the meat based upon the supervision you provided now, you would have fed forbidden meat to the sons of my daughter. Because he's his son-in-law, right? Because no one apart from me was watching the meat when you all came out to greet me. And this is because this is all in the Chulin, because it's something called basar hane'elam min ha'ayin, meat that is lost, you have not kept your eye on, and somebody who's not Jewish has come to mess around with it. We're concerned that it might not be the original kosher meat. And despite the fact he'd kept the meat in sight, Rav did not eat from that meat. That's the story of him and his son-in-law and their beautiful day trip along the ferry. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that Rav did not eat the meat? That's the story, okay? As it's told in the Talmud. Why didn't he eat the meat? If one suggests that he was concerned that it had been obscured from sight, that cannot be the reason, as Rav kept watching it, so it wasn't obscured from sight. So his kids could eat it, or his grandkids could eat it. Rather, Rav did not eat it because what did it say he did?
He's saying he's penalizing himself.
He
He
saw the arrival of the ferry as a good omen. This is prohibited, and therefore he penalized himself to abstain from the meat.
I don't quite understand that.
He said when the boat arrived, the ferry arrived, that must be a sign that I'm going to have a good day and I'm going to go and have a big meal at my son-in-law. If he had come then, he was waiting, when am I going to get to see him? So he would have said, okay, now I'm here, they're having a festive meal, we can enjoy. But because he had given himself that little bit of what we are calling menachesh, which is what? An omen, telling him, it's going to be a good day. I've arrived and the bus is here just as I got here, the party started. That's a sign of an omen. So he penalized himself and he said, therefore, I'm not going to have that. It says Rashi, any omen that one does not rely on completely. So the Talmud there goes on to say, is like, when it finishes that particular Talmud, it refers to the story of Eliezer. And it says, any one who relies because over here, Rav didn't really rely on this omen. He didn't say he didn't leave his house saying, I'm not sure what to do today. But if when I go out, I see the ferry coming, I'm going to take that as a sign to go and visit my son-in-law, then he would be doing an omen like Eliezer was doing. If whoever who lowers the barrel and feeds me, or the camels, that was a sign that he can marry the master's son. Here he didn't do that. He was going anyway. But because it came, it wasn't a complete nechesh.
So you just knew about 5 million Balaamites.
Yeah. Of course.
Everything my grandmother's taught me was total.
What did your grandmother teach you? Don't tell us all 5 million, but tell us some of them.
You get it.
Exactly. Tosfot has a problem with this. Tosfot's quandary is, if serving idols and pagan worship is one of the 7 Noahide laws, that means that it's not only a command against Jews. If so, how could Eliezer have made an omen? It's against principles of value of all people.
When did he make an omen?
Eliezer,
Yeah.
we just read it, that whoever
Oh,
feeds...
yeah, right. It's the unreal. All right.
So Tosfos says like this, and if you ask, how could Eliezer have practiced divination by taking the omens? One can answer that this sage holds that Eliezer did not give her the bracelets until after she told him whose daughter she was. In other words, he didn't use the omen as a sign of who to marry. Rather, he used it as an omen because, as we'll see in the next, some of the later ones, he used it as a sign that this would direct him to potentially the family of Abraham. He would then ask, are you from the family of Abraham because you've been super kind to me? And if she says yes, great. Now I'll give her the jewelry and now she can come and marry my son-in-law. We read before that he gave the jewelry first and then asked where you come. So, which if you were listening the whole way through, you would have remembered that statement that I made. Good, those are the shaking the head.
Chronological order.
It's not in chronological order. The Torah is not in chronological order. So it's telling a story outside. It's a bit of a, scratch your head with the other side thing, way of deleting it. But remember, we just bring you the sources for your own pleasure and your own intellectual stimulation. But he's answered the problem of Eliezer using what seems like an omen, a sign, to decide what he's doing, to say it wasn't quite an omen. It was putting him on the right direction. He praised Hashem, and now that he's got the right direction, and he confirms that this person is in fact from the family of Abraham, then, okay, perfect, my sign worked. I knew you would be one of those people because you've been so kind. This, if we jump to Ibn Ezra in B, he says the same thing. Many are perplexed because they say that the servant expressed his request improperly. I, however, do not see anything wrong in what he said. For had it been another maiden, one not of Abraham's family, who had offered him to drink his camels, he would have left her and nothing would have been lost. In other words, he wasn't using it as the sign, this is the one that I need to go for. But if I then ask her and she comes from that family, then beautiful. The sum of the matter is the servant prayed, last lines. The sum of the matter is that the servant prayed that God would appoint for Isaac a young lady from the family of his master, the sign of God's choice being that the maiden would act graciously as a woman of noble character. Should. God heard his prayer, and therefore he found the right one. But it wasn't quite the omen according to this approach. It wasn't some sort of magic. If you read in the previous one, there's a foreknow. He says, this was not a statement but a prayer, that things should develop in this fashion. He did not rely on any magic, i.e. that the signs he stipulated would determine his action. So what do we see from all this? I'd like to come to some sort of close. And also with it, I'd also like to understand why Eliezer and Shaul are answered favorably and Yiftach HaGiladi is not. And I'd like to end with this particular thought, and it's not my own particularly. I've put together thoughts as I've seen them in different rabbis. We have to make an effort ourselves in the things that we do. And there might be things that you would say that leads me in a particular direction or an understanding to lean toward a particular thing. But there's two things that come with that. Number one, before we speak and say something, think of the depth of the words that we are saying. The words are very powerful. And when we say, Hashem, please X, Y, and Z, let's focus on what it is that we've said. Number two, we need to ask and have faith. We need to ask and have faith in Hashem, which is to an extent what Eliezer is doing. He goes too far with it, giving a condition to it. But we need to have faith in Hashem. Hashem, I'm about to go to work today. Please bless what I do. And if a good deal comes my way, let me know that this is a good deal and I should go for it. You might not say if my coffee spilt on my right knee, therefore I should invest anything that comes on my right-hand side of the computer. That's a bit much. That's an omen. But understanding that Hashem runs the world and giving our faith into Hashem and expressing thanks and gratitude, which to an extent is what Yiftach wanted to do. But Yiftach did it slightly different than the other two. The other two Firstly, we're dealing with somebody else's needs, and we're asking Hashem to direct him in the right way for somebody else's need. The Jewish people were at battle with this guy Goliath, and Saul's daughter needed to get married. Saul didn't say, give me longer reign. He said, whoever it is that manages to do this battle, he can marry my daughter. His daughter needs to get married, and the Jewish people need to get saved. And David is the one that did it. Similarly with Eliezer, he wasn't coming for his own interest. In fact, just to add, his interest was that his daughter would marry Abraham's son. He was actually quite disappointed when he couldn't make the shidduch. But he again is going for his master and for Isaac, and it was for somebody else. Yiftach did two things that were problematic. First of all, it was for himself. He was the one that was going out to battle. And number two is he said, if I come back. In other words, he was making a stipulation. Instead of saying, Hashem, please bless me when I come back, I'm going to give you sacrifices and thank you. He said, if I come back, then I'll be thankful. And it was for himself. And finally, the first two are about matchmaking, finding somebody a shidduch. And when it comes to finding somebody a shidduch, there is no greater, and I read this from a few commentaries, there's no greater assistance than that of Hashem. And we need Hashem's signs. Sometimes we need to have faith in Hashem that this is the right person that you are to marry, and have faith in Hashem that when you do commit to marry this person, the marriage will go beautifully. And with both of those, Shaul, it was his daughter's marriage. Here it was his master's son's marriage with Eliezer. And then they were answered, because when it comes to marriage, there's a lot of siyata d'shmaya, a lot of help from Hashem that is needed. And our own actions rely on that. So there's another snippet into that. But I would like to end with one last thing. There was another medrash which I didn't bring. And that is, ultimately, of all people that asked for something, the midrash says 3 of them were answered before they had even finished their request. And this is in a complementary way to Eliezer. One is Eliezer, one is Moses, and one is King Solomon. And with all of them it says, Vayihi terem, or before they even finished. In this instance it says, Vayihi terem, before he finished asking, and Rebecca came out. And that's the biggest sign that Hashem is, you're trusting in Hashem, that Hashem's blessing is ready to be given to you. All you need to do is say, Hashem, please give it, or Hashem, it's coming from you, and the blessings rain down.
Moses?
Which was Meris's one? Moses one?
What was his? Because he made a request that was denied.
Yeah, he made a few requests that were, the main one of that is Hanan, but since you've asked it, I will.
He wanted to
Wait,
see
I
the
thought
promised
that
land.
those other 2 came right afterwards, but Eliezer's came before he
But-
even finished.
Which other 2?
As in Shlomo and
Well, with where she said, with Yaakov, with Moses, it was when with Korach and the land opened up under them before he'd finished asking Hashem. Yeah, he said, please save me, and it happened. With Shlomo, it says, it was when they had finished, whereas Eliezer was even before he finished, you say. True, Nerch is adding a true point that what happened before. In synopsis, we trust in Hashem. We don't need signs. We ask Hashem for the things that we need, and Hashem will bless us in an abundance and answer us even before we've finished asking in all what we need. That is today's class, and I will let people ask questions. Next week, we will look at the 3 tiers of Esau and the mystery of his head. And is it ever permissible to lie? Jacob gets the gifts of his brother. So is it ever permissible to lie? And the mystery of the tiers and the head of Esau. Any questions before we close? Hannah Abram has a question. Yes, Hannah. You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, yes, I was looking for the microphone. I've heard a lot of stories about people in life or death situations saying, Hashem, if you save me, I'll put on tefillin every day, for example, or keep Shabbat. Is that not allowed?
That's beautiful. First of all, if you say, that's different. You don't say, if Hashem, you're not making a condition of it. You're saying, if I do, then I'm going to do a mitzvah. And that's a beautiful thing to do. And generally, a person, beyond that, a person should really do those mitzvah immediately. It shouldn't be, if I get out of this, then I will start putting on tefillin. But if a person says, I want to get help through this, I'm going to put on tefillin, or I'm going to keep kosher, at that stage, you should do it immediately, rather than wait for it to get out from it. But there are people who are saying, since I survived, there's much more meaning to it. But they didn't make that condition when they went into that. It was when they were in a difficult position. They said, I want to commit to do something. And that's always a good thing to do. Someone's asking about the signs of the Urim V'Tumim, but that's different. That's prophetic. That's not signs that we were making. God is sending those signs. Any other questions? I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you all for coming.